Welcome back to Monitors Unboxed. Today I'm taking a quick look at the MSI MAG321 UPX, the slightly cheaper version of MSI's popular 32-inch 4K 240Hz QD-OLED gaming monitor. I wanted to test this display properly to see how close it gets to the 321 URX variant we've been recommending for a while now, because if it turns out the 321 UPX is basically the same monitor, it would be a great choice for buyers. In the US, it's $50 cheaper, and I'm certainly a fan of saving money to get a similar product. So first, let's clear up any potential confusion about MSI's naming scheme. For some reason, MSI have decided to make a whole bunch of 32-inch 4K QD-OLED monitors. Early in the year, we tested the MPG321URX, the higher tier option in the lineup with a $950 US MSRP. Today, I'm testing the MAG321UPX, which is a slightly less feature-rich product at a $900 US MSRP. Just a two-letter difference in the names there, so it's easy to mix them up. Luckily, both use the same QD-OLED panel and pack the same basic panel specifications. Both are 32-inch 4K 240Hz QD-OLED monitors, so the same refresh rate, same resolution, same brightness spec, it's the same hardware. The differences between the 321 UPX and 321 URX are minor. The UPX has a slightly different design that emits RGB LED lighting, and the UPX also has reduced USB functionality. Specifically, there is no USB hub or USB data ports on the 321 UPX. It retains a USB-C port with DP-Alt mode for display signal input, but the port's power delivery has been downgraded from 90 to 15 watts, and it can't be used as a data connection to a PC. As a result, the UPX also emits KVM switch functionality. Originally, the lack of USB data ports meant the 321 UPX sacrificed firmware update support, which is a big deal on high-end HDR monitors, as firmware updates are often necessary to improve performance, add new features, or fix bugs. But shortly after release, MSI made a minor hardware revision, adding in support for firmware updates over DisplayPort. The majority of 321 UPX units sold are this updated model with firmware update support, but a small initial batch does not include this functionality. If you do happen to buy or own one of these initial models, you can contact MSI to get it upgraded to the revised model with the necessary hardware for updates over DisplayPort. This eliminates one of the main reasons you wouldn't consider the 321 UPX versus the 321 URX. Both models can be updated. I went through this process on both variants, and it's a little more janky on the 321 UPX. MSI's firmware update utility is not especially intuitive, but it worked to upgrade my UPX to firmware 19. This is only possible through special hardware, which is why most monitors without USB ports cannot be upgraded, but I'm glad MSI released this hardware revision to enable updates. Aside from the USB changes, you get otherwise the same ports, including DisplayPort 1.4 with DSC and HDMI 2.1 with DSC. The design changes are relatively minor and lower manufacturing costs, which help to reduce the price. The RGB LED segment at the top of the rear panel has been replaced with a version that emits lighting. The rear panels have been modified to use a simpler design, and the bottom bezel is a different, cheaper type of plastic. But the general aesthetic and build quality is basically the same as the higher cost URX model. So unless you are really keen on RGB LEDs, the downgraded design here is a non-issue. You can't even see the lighting from the front, to be honest. What's also the same between the 321 URX and 321 UPX is the screen coding, panel composition, text quality, and anything to do with the display panel hardware itself. I would strongly recommend watching the MPG321 URX review to get my full thoughts on this 4K QD-OLED panel, because all of those sections apply to the 321 UPX as well. This includes the risk of permanent burn-in, which is the case for all OLED monitors. There is no difference in OLED care features between the two models. All of the panel protect features are included here. MSI also offered the same 3-year burn-in warranty for both models. Motion performance, again, identical between the two MSI models, so for full details on that aspect of this 4K QD-OLED, again, I would recommend checking out the 321 URX review. The 321 UPX also performs the same as any other 240Hz OLED, so there's absolutely nothing to worry about here. This monitor provides elite speed for gaming. It was nice to confirm that both models deliver the same input latency as well, both in the SDR and HDR modes. The 321 URX was a low latency display thanks to its high 240Hz refresh rate and 0.1 millisecond processing delay, same experience on the 321 UPX. Now you're probably watching this video and going, well, is there anything different about the 321 UPX? And the answer is yes. On the minor end of the scale, the 321 UPX uses slightly less power than the 321 URX. It's not a drastic difference, but it is a small reduction. The biggest difference, though, is with factory calibration. Simply put, the UPX model is not as well calibrated out of the box as the URX. My UPX unit had a noticeable red tint by default and incorrect gamma that caused a small amount of black crush. This led to poor Delta E grayscale performance. It's also oversaturated, though this is true of all other QD-OLED monitors too. The URX is much better calibrated in comparison, at least comparing the units I reviewed. The factory grayscale Delta E average on the URX is significantly better than on the UPX, and there's a difference in color checker Delta E's too. The reason for this is the URX came with a much better color temperature and flatter gamma curve from the factory, with nowhere near the level of black crush. The sRGB mode is also less accurate comparing the two models, the main issue here being the still incorrect color temperature, and this is something that you cannot change as MSI locks the white balance controls. This would be fixable on, say, the ASUS PG32 UCDM in comparison, because it has an unlocked sRGB mode. However, the good news is that the gamma curve is much better than the factory configuration, and the sRGB gamut emulation is effective. But when we compare the sRGB mode on the UPX to the URX, there's a substantial difference. The URX is simply much better calibrated from the factory, whereas the UPX fails to reach the threshold I consider to be properly factory calibrated. It's possible that to cut costs, less effort has been put into the calibration process with this cheaper model. Now, you can calibrate both models yourself to the same level of performance using an ICC profile, but as both MSI variants have the same OSD features, there's limited scope in the hardware itself to fix these problems, mostly because MSI uses a locked sRGB mode. The 321 URX is the model to get if you care about factory calibration. Now, while calibration is different, I didn't see any differences in maximum SDR brightness, viewing angles, color gamut, or uniformity between the two variants. In fact, with brightness, I saw just a 2 nit difference, so this is very much pointing to the same panel being used. Luckily, the issues with SDR factory calibration have not bled across to the HDR mode, so the URX and UPX end up delivering basically the same HDR experience. The UPX comes with the same two HDR configurations, a true black 400 mode and a peak 1000 nits mode, which result in the usual QD-OLED performance characteristics we've seen across similar modes in other QD-OLED monitors. The peak 1000 nit mode delivers virtually identical accuracy between the two MSI models, so we get good EOTF tracking for lower APL content and peak brightness that reaches around 1000 nits, but there's panel dimming in higher APL scenes. The true black 400 mode caps brightness to 450 nits, but has strong EOTF tracking in both low and high APL scenes, leading to higher brightness in brighter scenes, but lower highlight brightness. Both modes are compromised experiences in one way or another, so you still have to choose which sort of experience you like, with no option delivering the best of both worlds. Here is a quick confirmation of how the two monitors compare in HDR calibration, both using the peak 1000 nit modes here. Accuracy is virtually identical, which is good to see, and we also get basically the same HDR color volume as the panel is unchanged. Then for HDR brightness, we're talking about minor differences at best, with HDR calibration and EOTF tracking being basically the same between the two models. HDR content looks identical in terms of brightness and contrast. So it's great to confirm that this is still an excellent HDR monitor, even if there's a few issues with SDR. Lastly, I'll quickly show the feature support matrix here, which is largely the same as for the 321 UPX, except for a few minor differences. With reduced USB support, you don't get things like a KVM switch here, and the monitor isn't as well calibrated from the factory. In other areas, you are getting the same experience. So should you buy the MSI MAG 321 UPX instead of the slightly more expensive MSI MPG 321 URX? Well, it's good to confirm that in most areas, the 321 UPX and 321 URX deliver the same experience. They both use the same panel, they produce the same level of brightness, they have the same HDR performance right down to EOTF tracking, they are both very fast 240Hz OLEDs, and largely they have the same features. This isn't a situation where the cheaper UPX is giving you a binned panel that is worse than the panel that you get with the 321 URX, it's the same. The main factor that will determine whether the 321 UPX is worth the discount is SDR calibration. Based on my testing, the UPX isn't as well calibrated in the SDR mode as the URX. The URX has excellent factory calibration, particularly in the sRGB mode, The same can't be said for the cheaper UPX. But this is mitigated somewhat by both monitors delivering near identical HDR calibration. So if you are primarily gaming in the HDR mode, how the SDR mode performs isn't very relevant. If you think you'll be using the SDR mode a lot, then it could be worth paying the extra $50 to get the 321 URX. If you'll mostly use the HDR mode, the saving is probably worth it. The other differences between the monitors I think are close to negligible. Eliminating the RGB LED lighting on the rear and getting rid of a few USB ports isn't a big deal to me, especially now that MSI supports firmware updates over DisplayPort with this model. The reduced USB-C power delivery is also a relatively minor downgrade. I certainly wouldn't pay $50 to upgrade from 15 watt to 90 watts of USB-C power. Based on what I've seen, I could really go either way with this one. The 321 URX is the better monitor, and when we're talking about the $900 price tier, spending an extra 6% to get better SDR calibration and better USB functionality is justifiable. It's not a big difference in price, but if you want a 32-inch 4K 240Hz QD-OLED and you want to spend the least amount of money, the 321 URX is offering you exactly that, with an experience that is very close to MSI's more premium option, especially for HDR gaming. Either way you go, I think MSI are well positioned in the 4K OLED market. Both options are great, and especially in the United States, they're often the cheapest models on the market. My 321 URX review has many more details on how this panel performs, so it's well worth checking out, as well as all the other 4K OLED reviews on this channel, which have a lot more comparison data and that sort of thing in them. So anyway, that's it for this review of the 321 UPX from MSI. Another 4K QD-OLED monitor review, but I was interested in this one because it is one of the cheapest ones on the market. So hopefully you appreciate this content if you are tossing up between those two models and you want to know if there's any differences in performance. If you do want to support the channel here and our independent hardware testing, we really appreciate everyone who signs up to our Patreon page. Links to that is in the description below. If you sign up, you get access to some cool benefits. We've got our ICC profiles and monitor settings there. So if you want to do some calibration, that's available to you. We've got our Discord community. I'm in there chatting with you guys about stuff all the time. We've got BTS content, monthly live streams, plenty of good stuff. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.